Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. This is the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and go over the past week's events in the world of Scientology. Tony, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here, Chris. How you doing?
Peachy keen. So much stuff as I'm coming off the post-birthday bliss from L. Ron Hubbard's birthday last week. I'm heavily rolling my eyes right now. Okay, let's go ahead and get into it. You had some very interesting reporting last week, starting with something I haven't thought about in years, but I actually have some comments to make about this one, and that is the suppressive person checklist. Please describe what this is and what this was about.
Well, I think, one of the things people learn about who are interested in learning about Scientology and its controversies, one of the first things you learn about is this idea of the Church of Scientology declaring people suppressive persons. And that is basically declaring somebody an enemy of the church. They tend to be former members who have spoken out. A declare order is created that lists their crimes. And in the old days, you get to see it. And it became famous because they were printed on goldenrod paper. And so they became known as your goldenrod. People would say, have you seen your goldenrod? I've seen my goldenrod. And this was the list of your crimes. It was your declare. These are terms that people are very familiar with if they're interested in the subject of Scientology. It's like I said, it's one of the first things you learn is about SPs. People who have been declared enemies of the church. Well, this was an interesting new document because it's the checklist you are supposed to go through as you create one of these declare orders. And now I am interested in your reaction to it. My reaction as somebody that was never in Scientology was just what a lot of busy work was on it. I mean, it listed all these policies you have to pay attention to, and all these different steps you have to go through to write up somebody's crimes. My favorite, though, was the one that suggested that when you're writing these up, don't make it so it generates any sympathy for the person.
That's right.
Because it's not just a document that's given to the person to say, here, you need to know you've been declared an enemy, which is what they used to do. Now they don't do that so much. But it's also to show other people in the church so they know you need to stay away from this person because they're bad news. So you don't want to engender any sympathy for the person. You want to make them look like a really bad person. It's a shame they were ever among us. We've got to kick them out. And you now need to cut off all contact with that person, even if it's your mother or your child or your brother, whatever. They're out. So it's fun to see this actual checklist that somebody is supposed to follow as they create this awful document. But what was your reaction to it?
Well, a few actually, because even some of what you just said, got my wheels turning even more in how this is a document that is actually selling this former Scientologist, because the church is kicking them out, whether they want to stay or not. It's a sales pitch to the rest of the Scientologists as to why they need to agree that this person needs to be removed from their lives forever.
Right.
And that's really what this thing is. And I wouldn't have worded it that way, but you got me thinking. That's absolutely what it is. There was in fact a specific point on the checklist that says the facts are covered and dead agent data on the person is included in the body of the issue. And this, of course, is dead agent data is the Scientology term for reasons why you need to nullify this person as a source of information.
Right.
You're dead to the Scientologists. And I thought it was even funny in the wording that the facts are covered and then the dead agent data, because that's always made up bullshit, right? Having been at the receiving end of some of that. And I will say, having been declared, I have never seen my goldenrod. They refused to show it to me. And all these years, I've never had anybody show it to me or see it. The other thing I need to sort of pony up to or confess to here, though, is that this isn't the first time I saw that checklist. I used it in Scientology, and I got somebody declared.
Wow.
And I followed those steps. Now I kind of look back and think I was doing the guy a favor and kicking him out of the church. But at the time, it was a really big deal, and it weighed heavily on me. I got to say this because it's not a mild step in Scientology, and it's not something that I think this checklist, if it does show anything, it shows how seriously internally they take this. This was not a document that was ever meant to be seen and talked about by people like us. This is how they actually do it. And when you walk through those steps, every step is important. You better dot the I's and cross the T's. And this is how they do it. It's an almost, dare I say, German efficiency, with this internally. So I'll say that, and having been on the receiving end and the giving end of it, this checklist is one of many.
Well, another, I think, really important point on the checklist, and this was something Claire pointed out to me when we talked about it last week, was it talks about where you're sourcing this information is any and all of the person's files. So right there in black and white is what Scientology always denies publicly, that they dig into your confidential files to put together dead agent material, to smear you, to make sure people don't listen to you. It's right. You're instructed to do it on the checklist. You got to dive into every single one of that person's files, go all through their most private stuff that they've told counselors, supposedly under priest penitent, confidentiality, which we know is bogus in Scientology. So it's right there in black and white that, yes, of course, they dig into your files to produce as much dirt as they possibly can. And then, of course, they exaggerate it and do ridiculous things with it. But that is an important point that, Scientology tells courts all the time that there's this confidentiality about confessional files, and it's just not true.
No, not even a little bit. And let's be clear why. Scientology has a rule set or a justice system, but inside its own writings on this states this is only for Scientologists. Therefore, when we're kicking you out of Scientology, you don't have these rights anymore. When I remember myself in an earlier version of myself doing this to somebody, the very first thing on my mind was not their rights. It was, how dare they betray us like this? Bang, bang, bang. You're out of here. And of course I'm going to use this information. You have no rights. And this is the dangerous thinking of what cults really do to people that I want, that I'm glad we got to that point on that, because that's something to highlight here as to how this happens. All right. Moving on, though, we had some other great reporting, and we have another move forward on Leah's case. There was an RTC appeal. Let's break down what happened.
So the previous week, Chris, we talked about how in Leah's lawsuit, remember, she sued back in August 2023. She's basically suing over being the subject of a fair game, intense, awful, smeary fair game campaign by Scientology that's been going on for years. And she's suing, saying that it's harming her ability to make a living. There's a material, economic, damage that she's experiencing. There were some preliminary moves. Scientology filed some anti-SLAPP motions and motions to strike to try to gut the lawsuit right at the beginning. Judge Randolph Hammock agreed with Scientology that some of the things she was alleging, some of the smears online, were just opinion, not statements of fact. And some of them were a little old. So he cleared out some of the allegations, but he kept 7 of her 8 causes of action. So neither side was happy with it. But Scientology, the proof that Leah's lawsuit survived that and is still strong is that Scientology's appealing that ruling. So that's what we've waited a year for, is now Scientology's argument for why that ruling should be overturned to the appeals court. Last week, we talked about the appeal brief by the Church of Scientology International, how nasty it was, and it repeated all these horrible smears about Leah that are just awful. And I think we talked about the fact that the appellate attorney I talked to, Texas lawyer, said he was surprised that it was written this way. He doesn't think that that's how you should argue to the appeals court. And he thinks that, they're clearly playing up to Miscavige rather than the court. That was last week. This week, I got a hold of a second brief that RTC filed, the Religious Technology Center, the nominally controlling entity in the Church of Scientology. I always say that, nominally controlling, because we all know it's the Sea Org that controls the Church of Scientology, but the Sea Org is not a legal body. David Miscavige is chairman of the board of RTC, and that's the position he has, that he rules all of Scientology. So Leah is arguing in the lawsuit that whoever is operating these terrible online accounts that are accusing her of all these horrible things, it's Scientology. And David Miscavige runs that. And so she's put CSI and RTC and David Miscavige in it. Well, RTC argued, you're not alleging anything specific about us. We shouldn't be in the lawsuit. The judge allowed Leah a little time to add declarations from Mike Rinder and Claire Headley to make those allegations specific and say there's no way a retaliation scheme like this, smearing Leah Remini, would be occurring without the micromanagement of David Miscavige and RTC. And the judge at that point, I was there, I saw this. Judge said, that's enough. You've alleged it. Okay? At this early part of the lawsuit, and even though it was filed almost 2 years ago, it's still early. At this early part of the lawsuit, all you need to do is allege it. When it comes to later in the trial, after discovery and a trial, she'd have to have more evidence to prove, and it would be really interesting to see testimony on that about David Miscavige. But right now, she just needs those declarations. Well, RTC is still hopping mad about that a year later. And so they filed their own appeal brief just going after those two declarations and saying to the appeals court, this was not properly done. Mike Rinder and Claire Headley have both been out of the church for many years. They have no idea whether RTC had anything to do with what was going on with Leah. Again, the judge said at this level, you just have to allege it. And of course, they made the point multiple times that Mike Rinder has died and he will not be able to testify further in the case. So I think they threw that in a couple of times just to kind of twist the knife. And it is a shame that Mike is not going to be able to testify further in this case. But he did supply a great declaration, and it would be a shame to see the appeals court throw it out. But that's what this particular document was about this week. RTC is still hopping mad that Mike Rinder and Claire Headley got to put in declarations specifically about David Miscavige and RTC in order to tie them into this lawsuit. So we'll see if the appeals court keeps it that way.
Right.
The next step, I know you always ask me, the next step, Chris, would be that Leah is also appealing the ruling. She also did not like that Judge Randolph Hammock had removed so many things. He's no longer on the case. So she's going to, her attorney, Daniel Saunders, or an appellate attorney they hire, will be filing their comeback. I don't know, 3 weeks, a month, something like that. I don't know exactly sure the timing on that, maybe a little more than that. But that'll be really interesting to see how Leah responds to these attacks by both CSI and RTC.
Yeah, exactly. I had a few points on this one because I went into the details on your reporting on this, which is you really, if you're not reading Tony's Substack, you really need to do yourself a favor and do so. And I'm sure if you're watching this show, you do. But maybe just plug that. Tony doesn't pay me to say stuff like that.
Thank you, Chris.
But there were some choice quotes from the article. This is a test of how much credence the Court of Appeals is willing to give the claim that these are separate entities, RTC and Church of Scientology International, because legally they are. And let's be crystal clear, as you made so clear already, though, that this is all a juggling act in legalese. None of this is real. These are just paper entities. Not really, but for all intents and purposes, the way David Miscavige treats them, he comes down whenever he wants. He orders whoever he wants, however he wants, whenever he wants. That is how Scientology is. So this entire mosaic that is being painted by the attorneys constantly has to paint this picture that Miscavige is separate and different and so above all of this and has nothing to do with any of this. So this is really going to be is the appeals court buying it or not? But I wanted to ask you, I have an idea about this, but the tone and language of this one,
very different.
Calm, it's rational,
yeah.
It's chill even. There's no invective, right? I think they said one thing about Leah being a, has been actress, but, not very,
right.
Whatever. So what do you think is up with the tone change?
Right.
But I'm curious what you're...
I mean, clearly the CSI appeal from the week before was written for David Miscavige. It was vicious. It was sneery. It was awful.
Yeah.
And Texas lawyer told me, the appellate attorney, he said, I don't know if that's a particularly good idea for this appeals court, but that was written for David Miscavige. To give the impression that the Church of Scientology is under attack and they're not going to take it. They're going to fight back because they have their right.
Yep.
That's the impression. And CSI, we've seen this before. I go back to Monique Rathbun's lawsuit, 2013, and they were working very hard to get David Miscavige and RTC pulled into it. And I remember CSI's attorneys going into court and saying, Judge, if there's going to be a hit, we will take it. If there's going to be a judgment, CSI will take it. I mean, they were like practically begging in court, leave David Miscavige alone, target us. That was very, very clear in that case.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that here, where CSI is using all this horrible language to get attention. RTC then comes in. They're very unhappy about the Mike Rinder and Claire Headley declarations, but they're not making they're just being very calm about it. I think they're trying to perpetuate the idea that David Miscavige is this ecclesiastical leader and RTC is this religious organization that's just trying to maintain the purity of the tech. So they're not going to use that kind of down and dirty language. I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to give that impression that we shouldn't even be in this lawsuit. This lawsuit's a fight between these two groups. We shouldn't. I think that's what's going on with those two. Why the language of this one is so much more reasonable and calm.
Well, I certainly agree with you in terms of intent. And I think that we talk about how this wild attack dog language that's used, which is clearly a choice. And it's a choice that we say is made so that Miscavige can, whet his appetite on these people, right? Because, we know from his own texts how he likes to talk. So, I mean, man, this guy has a potty mouth. So we get that part, right? But we also see here that he's amenable to reason because he had to approve this.
Yeah.
Right? So we can see that he can see a strategic advantage.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to point out that it's not even so subtle, and yet it kind of is, because it's a kind of psych-based warfare on the appeals court. Look at the attack dog versus us reasonable.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I think Miscavige understands that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this appeals court for just a second, because it's interesting that they are taking that aggressive, smeary kind of approach with their main brief, because this particular, the Second Appellate Division of California Court of Appeals, they are no stranger to Scientology. This is the same court that 3 years ago reversed the arbitration ruling and restored the civil lawsuit by Danny Masterson's victims. So this is a court that understands Scientology. Now, I don't think it'll be the same three justices, but they read each other's rulings. And I think that Dave might know that he's heading into a bit of a headwind here, because this court does understand Scientology and understands a little bit of its games. This is the court that asked William Foreman, the Scientology attorney 3 years ago or whatever, are you saying that if I signed a contract with Scientology and 30 years later a Scientology truck ran me over in the street, I couldn't sue the church? And William Foreman said, exactly, that's what we're saying. And the look on those justices' face.
Exactly.
So they're aware of kind of how ridiculous Scientology's legal theories are. And, that was a big, big loss for the Church of Scientology. So Leah may be on friendly ground here. We'll see how she does with her response.
Absolutely. The last thing I wanted to quote from your article, actually, on this from Texas Lawyer, because it was just such a perfect statement. The declarations from Mike and Claire that were, that this whole thing is all mixed up in. The declarations are not simply that Dave's been an obsessive harasser in the past. It's that being an obsessive harasser is RTC's official, consistent, and top-down policy.
Yep.
I just thought, wow, if somebody encapsulated it all perfectly in one sentence, that's it. That is exactly what RTC has been since the 1980s.
Yeah.
All right. Moving along, we did have this birthday event, and this was noted in your Substack. What do we have to say about this one?
Well, L. Ron Hubbard turned 114 on Thursday, wherever he is in the galaxy doing his researches free of a human body. That's the official story from Scientology, right?
Right.
And they celebrated it Saturday night at Ruth Eckerd Hall for their big annual event. And so for the day of his birthday, I reprinted a wonderful piece by Chris Owen, historian Chris Owen, who really dug into Ron's relationship with his parents, Harry Hubbard and Ladora May, and how, he disconnected from them, which can help explain why he would then create a disconnection policy for everybody else. He was messing around on poly and his parents didn't like it. And so he just cut him out of his life. And really interesting details from Chris Owen on that. He's so good at digging up the details on that kind of thing. And so I thought that was an appropriate thing for Ron's actual birthday. And then for Saturday, I'm just really looking forward to what we're going to see from the event. They had the event Saturday night at Ruth Eckerd Hall. They will show the video a week later, this coming Saturday, at the local orgs. And at that point, I think they'll put out their press release and we'll start to get a look at the pictures. I mean, one big thing I'm curious about, and we may still not find out much about it, but in past years, when Dan Sherman was still alive, he was the official biographer for Hubbard. And so there would be a part of the evening where, for once, David Miscavige would not be at the lectern, and Dan Sherman would come up and tell some tall tale about Hubbard's life.
That's right.
And there was a time when those videos got leaked to me, and I actually got to post way back when I was the Village Voice. I got a hold of one that was just wonderful, with Dan Sherman spinning this tale about L. Ron Hubbard single-handedly preventing nuclear holocaust on Earth. It's just great, total tall tales. I actually got to research the actual background of that one and how it was no resemblance to the truth. So that was always a big part when Dan Sherman was alive. I don't know if they still have that segment. I wish somebody who's been going the last couple of years would let us know. Do they still have the segment where they go back and tell a new story about Ron's life? And if they do, who does it? Is it just David himself? I don't know. And then the other thing is I like to see which celebrities have showed up. The last couple of years, the celebrities that have showed up at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event have been pretty significant. The only other time I'd ever actually seen Michael Pena at an event was when he was at a Hollywood Celebrity Center gala, like back in 2014 or something. And then he showed up at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event 2 years ago. Okay. And he was in the crowd next to John Travolta. Near Tom Cummins. That's right. I saw Michael Pena near Tom Cummins. So that was interesting to see him. He's one of the celebrities who has moved from Hollywood to Clearwater to be closer to Dave and Scientology. So that was an interesting little data point. And then last year, the big one, Elizabeth Moss, very pregnant, in the front row next to John Travolta, giving David Miscavige a standing ovation.
Yeah.
That blew me away. And Mike Render at the time said to me, he looked to him like, they're grooming her for something big because look, they've lost, Leah Remini, Laura Prepon and Beck left. then Chick Corea, Kelly Preston, and Kirstie Alley have all passed away.
Yep.
So that's quite a few big names that are no longer there. And with Elizabeth Moss there in the front row next to John Travolta, maybe she's being groomed for bigger and better things. I did reach out to her representative at one time to see if I could get them to at least acknowledge that she was there, but they wouldn't play ball with me. But the photo's there. There's no question she was there last year. So I'm very curious to see who was there this year. Maybe we'll get to see some celebrities, maybe not. The only time I have ever seen both John Travolta and Tom Cruise at the same event, it was a birthday event. That was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
So I'm always curious about which celebrity, because look, this is a special night for Scientologists. I mean, New Year's Eve is one thing. The IAS trophies for the patrons is another thing. But there's something about LRH birthday that is really special to longtime Scientologists. Am I right about that, Chris?
You're absolutely right about that. And it's because it's basically the only, well, not the only, but the most tangible line back to Hubbard that exists in Scientology now, because so many things have changed and so few things are really even connected to Hubbard directly like that. There's a lot less acknowledgement of him and a lot more acknowledgement and stress placed on David Miscavige. And that, just go to the Scientology website. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So, you have whole channels and playlists on how great a person David Miscavige is. You do not have the same amount of content about L. Ron Hubbard, which is funny. So, So clearly it's Miscavige's game and has been for some time. I was going to ask you about the Dan Sherman thing because I wanted to answer you. That was great on that, because I don't think there's been a replacement, and I'm gonna throw out as a guess that he's not going to be keen to replace him, because I think he wants Sherman kind of forgotten, and I think that's because he wants the biography forgotten. If I'm being honest, I don't think that biography is ever coming out. I mean, they can sell.
Right. They're never going to publish. They're never going to publish anything, but I'm still curious if they're still doing a kind of biographical segment during the show.
Yes.
Where they bring up, but you know what? Without Dan Sherman, I don't know that they've got somebody else to do that. And so maybe they're just skipping that and going right to the birthday game. I don't know.
That's what I'm curious about too. It was called a source briefing. And what capital S, source, because L. Ron Hubbard is source. And so that's what it was called. And if you had a briefing, you either had a briefing where it was, quoting L. Ron Hubbard works, which is a source briefing, or it's a briefing about source. And we loved those things as Scientologists more than anything else. Other than learning about the two things at the top of the pile, at least as far as my experience of Scientology was new information about L. Ron Hubbard that you could only get at these birthday events, given out from people like Dan Sherman or Miscavige or whatever, or future plans of, campaigns and programs and what we're going to do to take over society and blow away psychiatry and all of that.
Well, we know he's pretty close to opening a couple of ideal orgs. The one in Puerto Rico, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, is apparently getting pretty close, and the one in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, is ready. It's completely ready. So he might have made an announcement like that last night and Saturday night in Clearwater, because the next opportunity would be IAS, right, in October. So maybe he said something about ideal orgs, and that again takes the focus. It keeps getting a little bit farther away from LRH, isn't it? It's getting a little bit more on Dave and his project.
Exactly. It will be telling if there's a source briefing at the Hubbard birthday event or not.
I wish someone would let us know, or if somebody would leak out the audio. We'll see. Yeah. Sometimes it happens.
Let us know. Yeah, let us know. Okay. Scientology, Long Island. Speaking of places going nowhere, what was the story here?
Yeah, this was great. This was one of our readers that went by, and it's always fun to get a field report like that. Just we don't. I like it when they just go and look. No, don't want to bother anybody. Just let us know what it looks like. and it was forlorn. They recently spent $15 million on an ideal org for Long Island. And so you would think, well, they must be, really doing a lot of business if they need this much bigger thing. But of course, you go by and it's around the back in the alley, basically, and the hours are minimal, and you have to like press on a keypad to even get into the place. I mean, just and then what was really interesting about this particular site visit was the person went around the back and saw kind of a conference room, and on hanging up was the org board. Really elaborate. I forget sometimes how incredibly elaborate the org board, which is the list of different positions of people that you're supposed to fill to run an org like that. And there were only 2 names filled out. So, and I'm told by people that know their stuff that really does mean that there's maybe only 2 people working at that org right now. And yet they have spent $15 million for a new building like things were booming. So it's once again proof the public is not interested in Scientology anymore. I mean, Long Island should be a hotbed. If there's any place that Scientology might appeal to people, it's a place like Long Island. In the past, places in California, New York, they were it was popular in the 70s, but not now. There's just completely dead. So I really appreciate that reader going by and getting us a look at what things are really like now.
Yeah, these photos are telling. Wow. I don't know. I don't know that I need a whole lot more comment here. Just go look at the pictures. It's, the state of Scientology as it really is. It's becoming more and more what, I love this term. I'm just going to keep throwing it out there. This sort of boutique religion, that's really what it's turning into. And you will see more and more changes over time with Scientology and its influence publicly becoming less. It will become more private as this goes, as though it's already, not private enough. Anyway, the final one we can talk about this week, and one where Scientology is very actively reaching out, is Clearwater. And the Clearwater City Council has been getting some visits from David Miscavige. What is this all about?
Yeah, we haven't heard much out of Clearwater recently. Tracy McManus left the Tampa Bay Times, and the paper really doesn't seem to be paying much attention to Scientology right now. But I got this tip. And I contacted Mark Bunker, and he looked into it, and he confirmed for me it is true that not too long, maybe a month or 2 ago, David Miscavige met individually with the city council members. This is something that they've been talking about for some time, even, and I have a video of Mark even talking about that when he was still on the council. The reason Miscavige does that is he knows if he meets with even just 2 city council members at the same time, that qualifies as an official meeting under the state laws. And, the substance of their conversation would be subject to a records request by somebody like me. So he knows he's got to meet with them individually. And then it's just a casual thing, right? So he met with the city council members because he wants something. And what he wants is their next big project in Clearwater is they want to build this L. Ron Hubbard Hall we talked about just the week before. That's apparently going to be not only this big performance hall for their events, but also possibly a museum for L. Ron Hubbard. And they're ready for the next step, which is to really start breaking ground. But in order to do that, they need this little street behind the flag building permanently shut down and given to Scientology. So they can build, not only bring stuff in there, but build on it and create this massive, big complex with the flag building and L. Ron Hubbard Hall. So, okay, look, if Scientology's, I don't think, like Mark Bunker made a great point. How does an L. Ron Hubbard Hall benefit the rest of the city of Clearwater? It doesn't at all. But, okay, if Scientology wants to go ahead and build something, okay, they need that street. That makes sense. But what is the city getting in return? See, this is what Mark was telling me is like, for so long, we've been trying to get him to do something with all of these vacant buildings he's got downtown that are just, nobody wants to go down there. And they've been waiting for Miscavige to go through on his promises to create some new streetscapes, some new lively buildings downtown. And Mark's point was always, okay, he wants something. he's got to go first, because over and over again, Scientology has lied. They've been surreptitious. They haven't done what they said they're going to do. If Dave Miscavige wants something, he's got to do something first. And he doesn't think that's going to happen. He thinks Miscavige reached out to these city council members individually, and tomorrow night they're going to do his, or tonight when you're putting this video out, they're going to do his bidding and vote to give him that street for nothing in return, except more promises that he's going to do something with the downtown. I mean, he may eventually, but it's just such a bad bargaining situation for the city. You know, it's like, anyway, so that's what's going on in Clearwater. Mark Bunker's going to go to the meeting and speak. Good. And I expect he'll put together a cool video for us afterwards. So we have that to look forward to.
Excellent. I'll definitely be checking that out, because this is very interesting. And it's interesting in a way that you can watch. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the results of this are, because Miscavige is the last person who should even be doing this work. I just want to point out, for example, there are people in the Office of Special Affairs who are supposed to be engaged in what's called PR area control, owning or having these lines of influence with various local officials, whether they're police, whether it's civic, whether it's whatever it is. It's the church engages in this activity, and it's something that they've been doing in Clearwater longer than anywhere else in the world, all the way back to the 1970s. This has been the area that is of more importance to them than anywhere else, and yet no one but David Miscavige can make this happen, apparently. And so here we are. And it's been years that he's been trying to make things happen there and can't even do it. While I guarantee you, he's telling all these people, you're all useless and scum and horrible. He never really gives them the opportunity to do the work, mind you. But then he comes in and does his thing. And I can guarantee you that what as you already pointed out, that it's all hot air coming out of him. He has no intention of honoring any of his promises to this city because he doesn't care about it. All he sees,
all they want to do is build this shrine to Hubbard and make it more of a Scientology city than ever before.
That's right. That's all they care about. And so if you're from Clearwater and you're watching, they're hearing this, please know this from people who have been dealing with this organization for decades, that Miscavige cannot be trusted, even down to the smallest, most innocuous thing that doesn't sound like any big deal. He just won't do it because he just doesn't care. Mm. And if he can give it to you and twist the knife at the same time, he'll jump at the opportunity. That's who he is. So, all right. So Tony, what a week, huh? Thanks for sharing the opinions and thoughts on all this and giving the descriptions on the stories and everything. Do you have any sort of prediction on this next week?
Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to what Mark sees at the meeting. I'm looking forward to the video he comes out with that. And if you haven't, you should subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's doing some really fun stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll see what happens there.
Awesome. So see you guys next week. Bye-bye.